Welcome. This is the session on addressing unconscious bias and stigma at work. My name is Melissa Egan. I am the coordinator of Episodic Disabilities Initiatives at Realize. Realize hosts the secretariat of the National Episodic Disabilities Forum. Today, our conversation is going to focus on unconscious bias and stigma and the ways that they impact the lives of people who are living with disabilities in the context of work. We're going to be hearing from a panel of amazing speakers, and we'll have a short question and answer session with them after they've had a chance to tell us a little bit more about their lives and their work. And then we're going to be moving into small group discussions. Each table will have a big piece of paper on it and some markers, and we're going to be asking you some questions, and we'll hope to hear from you. What we want by the end of the session are a few little gems that have come out of your conversations so that we can walk away with some really positive and interesting ideas that have come out of your conversations. Because today, our goal is about increasing understanding of why it's important that unconscious bias is recognized and addressed in workplaces. Ways that understanding it can be included in the implementation of the disability and work strategy. So today in this room, we're going to be generating ideas. We're planting seeds, creating connections. What we're hoping to do is to add to the community of people who are working towards individual, workplace, and systemic change. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, what's unconscious bias? Right. From my research, what I've read over the last few weeks as I've been getting prepared for this session is that unconscious bias is a set of shortcuts, things that our brain creates based on past experiences, culture, the things we've been told, and other external social and systemic influences. They're mental maps and patterns that we come up with in order to help us classify people into quick and automatic kind of associations. However, as with lots of things, when we do them quite quickly, they can sometimes be based on inaccurate information. They might be outdated ideas. They might be things that include exclusionary ideas and information. So unconscious bias can be unintentional and often go unnoticed, but they affect our judgment, they affect our approaches, and the decisions that we make as well. It gets in the way. Unconscious bias stands as a barrier and prevents us from moving beyond things like tokenism into authentic inclusion. Inclusion in this context, we're talking about that all people, regardless of their abilities, disabilities, they have the right to being respected and appreciated as valuable members of their communities, and they have the right to jobs in the community that pay a competitive wage, and that they have careers that use their capacities to the fullest. What we know about unconscious bias is that while it can be innate and something that people don't notice, what it often does is lead to stigma. So that's the other kind of half of what we're talking about today. Stigma tends to highlight negative labeling. Right? It's when a person's characteristics are seen as undesirable. While bias is a more general term and can sometimes be positive, right? There may be bias at work towards people with visible disabilities, and those might include feelings of trying to help and care. However, they may also come hand in hand with an underestimation of that person's skill and education. Stigma is a way that we socially discredit people. We tend to create classifications around stereotypes, and we reject people because they are not what we consider normal. Stigma is related to the conscious process of discrimination, okay? Unconscious bias is often something that you're not aware of and that people aren't aware of, but stigma is really often used as an instrument of power. It's a way of exerting a desire over another person in order to forward your agenda rather than include them. So in order to dig into this a little bit more, we need to consider the fact that the employment rate for people who are living with disabilities is more than 15 percentage points below the rate of other Canadians, and people living with disabilities are twice as likely to not be in the labor force at all. Many employers feel as though accommodation is primarily about the built environment and assistive software, but HR policies, management practices, they're often more important to effectively include people living with disabilities in the workplace. So how is all that going to impact what we talk about today? Well, to unlearn unconscious bias, we must be self-reflective. So there's going to be a little bit of that today. It takes time, it's not always easy, and acknowledging where we might be biased can be uncomfortable. So as adults, we're not used to not knowing stuff, right? We're quite accustomed to, being good at what we do and being comfortable in the way that we've chosen to live our lives. However, today we may experience some learning and growth, and that's what I'm hoping that we go through together. So allow yourself to be a little bit uncomfortable, but know that we're here, we'll support you through that, okay? This is our esteemed panel, okay? I'm gonna introduce the panelists as they speak with a brief bio. There are larger biographies in the agenda, so if you'd like to get to know these people a little bit more, please read about them. Our first speaker is going to be Tammy Yates. Tammy is the executive director of Realize, so I know her quite well. She is also the first Black woman to be appointed as the executive director of a national organization in Canada's HIV and disability sectors. Tammy's going to start us off here by speaking to unconscious bias in the context of intersectionality and some of her personal experiences. Thanks, Tammy.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, thank you very much. So, as Melissa shared, I am the executive director of Realize, and as you can tell, my Canadian accent is a little different. I am originally from the twin-island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and Trinbagonians tend to be great storytellers. Why did I hear that laugh in the corner there? So in the few minutes that I have with you this afternoon, I'm actually going to share 3 stories. The 3 stories are what I'm going to call chapters. So the first chapter is a confessional chapter. The second is a personal chapter. And the third is a professional chapter. So the first chapter is, let's have the title, The Realize Choir Story. Realize has an annual fundraising concert every year. And this year, we held the concert, as we do often, in Toronto at the Metropolitan Community Church, which is an LGBTQ plus focused church in Toronto. And I was at the door welcoming people in. And a very good-looking Black gentleman came to the door and handed me a purse. And he said, Pam has forgotten this purse in the car. So I went to the choir and I said, Pam, your Uber driver has given you this. You left it in the car. And I described the person and she said, Tammy, that was my husband. So we elicit, I laughed at myself, but I was also appalled at myself. As a Black woman, as an immigrant to Canada, as someone who tends to walk into rooms where I am the only different person, I myself called out that difference and identified that difference in a way that was not my best self. The reason that I share this confessional chapter How is possible that I have 2 minutes already? How is that possible? So that confession, and I'd only like one chapter. Anyway, so the takeaway, what I was going to call the takeaway from this, and I've moved away from that takeaway perspective, because what I give, you might not take away. What I want you to do is stop and think. So the stop and think moment with this confessional chapter is that we all have biases. We all walk into rooms and in spaces and inhabit spaces where we have biases. So number one, let's acknowledge, let's be self-aware. Self-awareness will then allow you to break open and work on these biases. And before I get the 1 minute mark, let me move on to chapter 2, which is the personal chapter. When I moved to Toronto in 2012, and I started working at Realize on episodic disabilities, yes, I'm seeing the 1 minute coming up, it spoke to me in a very, very personal way, because it then gave me language for something that I had been living with for my entire life. Many women in the room, self-identified and biological, in this case women, would understand when I talk about severe dysmenorrhea. And when I say severe dysmenorrhea, I'm talking about in my youth, I had what in my childhood mind I called my useless week, because I was so sick every 21 days that I could not attend school, I could not attend high school, and then being in the world of work, I then had to navigate that. And this is not, we're not talking about normal monthly cramps here. Melissa can share with you that even now, I'm just only a few years older, but even now, the office knows that I plan for the unplanned, because in every given month, I don't know how well or how unwell I might be around that time. So we plan for the unplanned. So that's my confessional chapter, and I'm going to round off with the professional chapter. The professional chapter is around the work that we do on episodic disabilities. ESDC launched a fabulous, well-researched, and well-consulted document yesterday, and it's called The Dynamics of Disability. When we started doing work so many years ago around episodic disabilities, the conventional view on episodic disabilities, what disabilities on the whole, was either that you are abled or disabled. Most people, many people, actually exist in that dynamic stream, that dynamic scope. However, research is often done along the two spectrums. Policy is often created along those two silos. Programs, eligibility, and so on often exist along those 2 points. So what I'm here to say is that very often when we walked into rooms, and as we still do sometimes, and you talk about dynamic, fluctuating, or episodic disabilities, people glaze over because they don't either A, understand what it is until you share the definition. And then, as Oprah often says, there's an aha moment. And either that person comes to me and says, I've lived with this condition all my life, or I know someone. The bias, however, which impacts the workplace, which impacts beyond the workplace, is that middle of the road where people still, again, the conventional view outside of this room is that you're either able or you're disabled. So at least my hopeful stop and think moment as I close beyond my 5 minutes is that when you go back to your workplaces or beyond, and someone shares with you, or even in your workplace, that you recognize that there's an employee who is fluctuating, that you have that conversation and that you don't stop and think, this person is either abled or disabled. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tammy, always the rebel, so we can try and stay a little bit more in line, okay, folks? All right. Our next speaker is Marcy Vautour, who is founder and CEO of Let's Reach Beyond, a nonprofit charity supporting adults living with disabilities transition from post-secondary school into work settings. Marcy is going to give us a sense of how living with a disability has impacted her experiences with job seeking and work. Do you want to come up here? Or do you want to stay where you are?
Or can I stay
Yeah,
here?
you can stay where you are.
Fantastic. Do I have to hold? Or I have to hold it? Or can I just
Just talking.
Does the mic at the back work?
Is it on?
Yeah, it works. I think it should be
Okay.
on.
Okay, well, I'm hard of hearing, and it's an invisible disability, and I wear an implant to help me hear. So I was born hard of hearing, and in my case, it was severe, and I didn't receive any help in high school or university, but I was really lucky. I was one of the lucky ones, and I made it through. A lot of people don't. And all through high school and university, I worked. And then after university, I was able to get a job with no problem. I worked in management and senior management all the time until I got my implant. And then when I got my implant, I wasn't one of the lucky ones. Mine didn't work. And for 14 years, I was completely deaf. So I had no sign language at all, and I was in my 40s. So that was really, really difficult for me. So gradually, I got up to about 5% hearing. And like many of you, I had to pay bills. And you know, if you own a home, your mortgage is due, and you have to pay bills. So, you know, you start panicking. So I applied for over 5,000 jobs. Anything. Mostly anything that I had done in the past. And I got a lot of calls where I went in for the interview. And as soon as I said I was hard of hearing, many just walked out. Some walked out and said they would return. And while I waited, I don't know where they went. They didn't come back. Got told I was retarded a lot. That was a new thing. So what I learned is that before I was hard of hearing, but I blended. That's my word. I used that word and I said, I haven't changed, but see, society didn't know that I was hard of hearing. So I was blending through life. Now everyone knows that I'm hard of hearing, and it's got a lot rougher. So now what I do is I'm trying to figure out what's wrong. So what I did was I met with some friends for tea. And then I found out we were talking about another topic, dating. And I made a joke about, you know, I'd never date a man with mustache or beard because I can't lip read I can't see their lips. And I'm like, I'd never date someone like that. And everyone's laughing. And I'm like, uh-oh. And they're like, what's the uh-oh about? That's my unconscious bias. And it's true. If I was hiring people, do you know, I would shy away from any man that has a mustache or a beard. It's not that I don't like them, but I would have a really hard time hearing them. I'd be always, what? And I would. It would be stressful for me. So that's what I'm saying. We all have an unconscious bias. We don't mean to, but we have to come forward and acknowledge that we have that. I have it. We all do. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcy. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is John Much, who is the Executive Director of Case Management at the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. Between 2011 and 2013, John played a key leadership role in the implementation of the WSIB Stigma Awareness Campaign, and he's going to speak to that a little bit.
Thank you. So I'm from the Workplace Safety Insurance Board. A little bit about the Workplace Safety Insurance Board. We administer about 300,000 claims every year and about 250,000 employer accounts. We have over 4,000 employees across 15 regional offices in Ontario. Around 2005, there was a study done on the Ontario compensation system. I will quote one of the key findings of that research. It said that institutionally embedded expectations that injured workers will violate or abuse entitlement existed in the compensation system. So this harsh reality of how we were treating our injured workers helped us develop a partnership with Steve and Rackley, and we created a working group to address some of the systemic issues that existed at the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. Part of our working group with Rackley, we called it the Blue Sky, and we reviewed a lot of other research that exists out there around worker stigma. There's Australian studies, a study done in Quebec about this. But the biggest piece for us was this self-reflection. And I remember sitting in a room with some of my leaders in that organization, and Steve went through this exercise of self-reflection. And it's about recognition at a personal level, what worker stigma means. And I think if you want a turning point in how the organization has adjusted, it was at that point where we had to tell our own personal stories about worker stigma and what it meant to us. With that, thank you. We created some tools to help us, but it was also to recognize that the systemic issues that exist at the WSIB. So the WSIB controls the benefits. We're an organization where employers give us money, revenue, and workers are considered a cost. We did have and we still do have a fraud department, which would signify that there's widespread fraud. And we had our own policies where if workers were not cooperating in the return to work or healthcare process, that we would find them non-cooperative and affect their benefits. So this type of systemic issues we really needed to address, along with the attitudes of our staff. And so some of the outcomes of this working group is that we created a learning program for our staff. When we do our recruitment, we have a check and a question around worker stigma. We did a series of presentations, and they were called When Hurt versus Harm, when help leads to harm, And that was some of the key messages that we came up with. So that was our work, and I'm going to turn it to Steve.
Yeah. Thanks so much, John. Our last speaker is going to be Steve Mantis, who's the founding member of the Thunder Bay and District Injured Workers Support Group. He's also presently serving as chair of the Research Action Committee of the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Group. Steve was also part of the development of the stigma awareness campaign that John just spoke about. Go ahead.
Thanks, Melissa. So my role oftentimes is as an advocate for workers with an acquired disability. And affecting change leads us on a number of different paths as advocates. And the partnership that John really described with our group and the WSIB was unique in our experience. Oftentimes, we see ourselves on opposite sides, opposite poles, and some of our advocacy is, demanding change and rallying in the streets and trying to get support really anywhere we can. And we've been building relationships with academics to help us in our advocacy, to provide scientific, peer-reviewed research that really backs up our experiences that we already know. But then that research has more credibility than we as advocates. As advocates, we're really seen as being biased, and we are. We're pulling for our members. We ended up at one of our gatherings of researchers and injured workers and community activists applying for and getting a big grant from the federal government, from SHRC. It was called the Community University Research Alliance. And it was a 6-year program, and it blew our minds. We got $1 million. Like our organization has no money, we have no staff. Everything happens, out of pocket and volunteer. So this was like, oh my gosh, look what we can do. And the first thing we did was we went to the folks at the WSIB, to senior management there, and said, we want to work with you. We're going to be developing new research. We would like to sit down with you and be able to talk about it. And the first in-depth discussion was on stigma. And in a way, I'm framing my talk here about what we can do together to address stigma on an institutional basis. Because it happens individually, but it's within the systems in which we operate and live. So how can we address them? Yes, we do have to address them personally, but how do we address them institutionally? And our partnership was built on, first, the players that were involved in our research collaboration. So we had 2 academics, we had 2 injured workers with lived experience, and we had 2 legal experts around the table with about 10 management folks from the WSIB. And the partnership was a key to moving forward. And so in a way, that was a challenge for us. I mean, here we are advocates. We feel like lots of times we're on different sides. To be able to let that go for a little bit and see if we could engage in really a productive process. And after that point that John mentioned, where folks at the WSIB experienced, from their own perspective, stigma, things started changing. And I've been an advocate now for 35 years, trying to change the WSIB, and here was one of the highlights for me, because staff within the organization all of a sudden lit up. It was like they felt like they were given permission to do the best thing they could around reducing stigma and eliminating stigma that they were involved in. And they got enthusiastic. And from the advocacy side, we sat back and just watched them run. It was like, oh my God, how is this happening? This is amazing. Of course, it's not over. And stigma doesn't just disappear because we have an initiative. And our organization, as many of us here are inspired by the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And we partnered again with researchers and developed a submission that we made in September. And really, when you start looking at international human rights, and our submission really deals with this, you see that some of our systems don't follow the human rights principles and actually use stigma to restrict entitlement for workers, to reduce costs for employers. And so we're continuing our work And it's so great because in meetings last week or the week before with folks at the Ministry of Labor, and I give them a copy of our submission to the United Nations, they go, we got that already. So we're addressing this issue and we continue to work on it, and it is a thing that probably we'll work on for the rest of our lives. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Steve, and thank you to all of our panelists. That was thought-provoking, and I'm hopeful that there are folks out here who have questions for our panelists. If you do, indicate in some way that you would like to ask a question. Give us a nod, raise a hand. Let us know that you would like to chit-chat with the folks up here. Anyone out there? Okay, we've got one over here. Thank you.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Thank you all for your excellent presentations. I have done a little bit of research on implicit bias. Firstly, I want to recommend a resource. It's called Project Implicit. Dot something. I think it's .com, but it might be .org. I suggest everybody try it. It's a 10-minute test, and you will be really surprised, as progressive as we all are, that you might have some hidden biases that you haven't tapped. What I did want to suggest is that implicit bias is a systemic issue. And it's great, I hear we're talking about fixing things in certain organizations and certain people, but the evidence is, for instance, if you do implicit bias training in an organization, that sticks for about, at best, a week, maybe a day. The problem is, when you go back out of your employment, you are exposed to all the biases that are ingrained in society, and the training, I mean, it's inbred, right? Where it's ingrained in us to act in a certain way because that's how we've been conditioned. However, so I think that some work, not only do we have to change employers one by one, but we kind of have to go upstream. And I commend the strategy, but what I think is missing is, if we want to change culture of business, we also maybe, I think we're actually saying we need to change the culture of society. And that, I think there's, what we kind of need is like a public service marketing kind of approach. There has been a number of public service marketing and contact campaigns that have been done around mental health in Australia, Scotland, the UK. They've had some decent results. So there's some models, and there is one actually going on here as well, Mental Health Commission, but it's much smaller. They're building towards something, but right now I think they're just piloting things. Anyways, I hope that helps.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments out there? Yeah, one in the middle. Thanks.
My question is for Mr. Much, Executive Director, Case Management, WSIB. I understood in your presentation that your working group has created a paper addressing when help leads to harm. Besides this paper, what other gains has this working group created, to facilitate the cultural shift in WSIB that is needed to address and accelerate workers' claims and adjudications and the like. And that's part one of my question. I'll listen to your answer first.
Yeah, so there were several things I tried to describe. One was a recruitment screen. When we do hire people into the WSIB, that we understand what their stance is on stigma. The brochure that I was talking about is available on our website, and it's going to be in the material, correct, Kathy? Yes. So you can have that. And we have a staff learning solution in which our staff go through training, and when there's performance issues and those issues addressed at a staff level, we have that training program developed. To say that, and I like your point, that we can just flick a switch and say that there's no stigma at the WSIB, this has been going on for almost 9 years, and I know it needs to be addressed at every level, and the WSIB is one of the system partners in it. We have employers, we have a stigma in our healthcare community. It's rampant, and we thought we'd start at the WSIB because we had the leadership support, and I'm hoping I'm answering your question.
Okay, because like most recently from my experience, like I'm learning within my workplace that, you know, WSIB has denied over 90 to 93% of the claims with respect to chronic mental stress in this province. Okay, so those are just some of the things that I have been working on.
Yeah.
But this is very specific and might be an unfair question, but I'm going to pose it. You had mentioned that the working group is addressing fraud, okay? Now, that, I'm sure department, it's funded, so I just would like to, you know, it might be an unfair question. How is it funded in terms of how much money is spent in the fraud department as opposed to spent on the delivery of services for injured workers?
Yeah.
And that might be an unfair question, but
No,
that would
because I did
help
bring
in
it up.
removing stigma.
Yeah, and I did bring it up because the existence that we had a fraud department, and I was just trying to make the point, because of that existence, that people think it's worker fraud. And actually, what we call our regulatory service department actually investigates more employer and healthcare fraud than worker fraud. Actually, the portion of worker fraud is minimal to the total of their work. So I just wanted to bring that up because when you talk about insurance, people always have this bias that it's workers just manipulating the system to gain some entitlement, which is not true. And we just had to go through that recognition a little bit.
Okay. There are a couple more questions up at the front of the room, but before we get to those, I'm just going to allow Tammy to respond to the first question.
Hi, thanks so much. I think it was more of a comment or a
Comment, yeah.
suggestion, but I wanted to respond because I was actually particularly excited when in the new federal cabinet, I saw that there's been an appointment of the first Minister of Diversity and Inclusion. I don't know if everyone is aware of that. So, of course, we do have Minister Qualtrough, who is focusing on workforce, employment, and disability inclusion, but there's actually a minister at the federal level responsible for the first time ever, as far as I'm aware, on diversity and inclusion. And so we want to ensure, again, when we are in spaces where we have any influence, that when people talk about diversity, when people talk about inclusion, it is not just ethno-specific. It is LGBTQ+, it is disability, it is language, and so on, when you have those opportunities. So thank you very much for raising that. We know that this is a pebble, you know, that hopefully continues to have ripples, but I think there is that recognition at the federal level, and hopefully we may see it mirrored at the provincial and territorial levels. Who knows?
Thanks, Tammy. Okay, 2 more questions up at the front here, and then another one at the back, and another one at the back. Okay.
Mine's really quick. It's actually for John. Thank you for speaking so candidly. It's fantastic. And I had a quick question because it sounds like you've made a real investment to work to reduce stigma, reduce unconscious bias, and have open conversations. Tremendous work. Thank you very much for it. Have you shared some of, I put down a learning program. Have you shared some of those on a peer level with some of the insurance providers that are out there? Because my organization, we wouldn't work as often with WSIB, we'd work with our insurance provider. We don't always get a great customer service experience from that, and I know colleagues will say they feel as though the assumption is that they're lying and they have to prove that their disability or their request for accommodation is true. So I think that collegial professional sharing would be tremendous.
Part of, we did it through other jurisdictions, so each of the provinces have administer their own compensation system, and I know actually Steve and I went to Quebec City, did a presentation on worker stigma at what they call the All Workers' Compensation Board Committee, but through other insurance companies, we have not reached out, but we're always willing, always like opportunity. There's always an opportunity to share. One of the things in the 2 hours this morning, like there's such a need to all connect, and because we share some of the same concerns and issues.
Okay.
There's a question.
This guy at the front. Okay, there's one over there.
Just a quick question to the panel, but also to people in the room, and I welcome you to come chat with me afterwards if this applies to you as well. Unconscious bias training for organizations, it's out there and it's all kinds of different forms. Some of them suck. I have written a few for organizations, but I still would really welcome if anyone has an example of a pay-to-play, like an e-learning online that you completely are in love with related to unconscious bias. I would love to hear if anybody is really in love with something they've used. Oh, can I play Mic Runner now? I feel like Phil Donahue.
I see you. Okay.
Thank you. I was going to run across the room too. Actually, you raised the good questions. In the Employment and Social Development Canada department, we ran last year an experimental study within the department on unconscious bias. One of the ministers asks, is there any bias in the way we evaluate applications to grants and contributions against women, against indigenous people, or organizations headed by people with disabilities, whatever it is. So we went through an interesting exercise from top level, a number of talking about the implicit association bias from Harvard University. It's only one instrument that can be used. But the point I want to make, and I think it was made more eloquently by you, Tammy, and others, is the fact that unconscious bias exists everywhere, among everybody. Most our decision-making processes are based on this. 99% is really, if I'm out in the hall at night and I come across somebody late wearing a hood and jacket, I pause because I'm not really sure I can cross that person. If it's somebody within a suit, yes, I think he's another federal employee, I would have no fear. And that's really the way we have. So there is something interesting in it, but the problem is when we don't really take that pause to evaluate situations, we end up doing really harm to others. And you said it. Any of the groups that they find themselves in relations of power that are really less equal in different ways, in terms of how they are perceived in what people think they can do or not do. And that's really the lesson. But in terms of resources, I think our friends here, they put there is if you go on the website of the organization, they put a lot of resources there that are, I think, wonderful. They contributed a little bit to put some of them there too, but I think you should. And otherwise, I would be happy to share with you a lot. I have tons of information that you can use.
Again, I'm looking for specifically online courses that companies can purchase. That, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay, Steve, are you going to respond to that? And then I just don't want to forget this last question at the end of the room.
Well, just adding to what Abdu mentioned, we've begun to collect resources, videos, research on unconscious bias and stigma. It's part of the website from the conference, and we...
Woo! Okay.
And
Everybody all right?
if you have anything to contribute, please send it in to us, and we'll share that information.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'm actually going to out myself by saying I would have put it on Slido, but I don't really know how to ask the question, so bear with me. But Abdu kind of is in the same ballpark as I was in, but I'm going to go beyond that. So in terms of, you know, if you're out and you pause because you don't want to cross the street, you don't want to cause harm to yourself or anyone else by making assumptions. However, that point made, my comment is actually for, my comment slash question is actually for the woman in the middle who has a hearing impairment. My apologies, I've forgotten your name.
Marcy.
Marcy, thank you. When you mentioned that, you know, your unconscious bias was that you wouldn't want to hire somebody with a mustache because you couldn't hear what they were saying, and that would make you uncomfortable and hard to do your job. Well, and that's a fair point, I think. So when does, you know, and then it made me think, well, does one disability trump another? And when do you take care of your own needs first? And I don't know how else to say it.
Disability trumps over another. Are you saying like maybe?
I'm saying that if your unconscious bias says to you, well, you know, I don't want to hire that guy because he has a mustache, are you saying you should hire him even if you can't hear him? Like then your disability takes is not as important as maybe his need to be hired? Or, you know, when does, we want to be inclusive, of course, but when different needs clash, for example, you know, who wins out, or what can we do in that situation? Does that make more sense?
Kathy's just transcribing everything that you're saying, so we just need a little bit of time.
Okay, this is an example. My dream is to have a company that has only people that have disabilities. Okay, that's my dream. But at the moment, in order to have, okay, where I live in Edmonton, to hire the people that I need, they're not available. The people with disabilities are not available at the moment, okay? So if I understand what you're saying, I would pick the best people. So I'm not trumping I would never even use that word. Most people, but that's just me, okay? I would pick the best person, okay? When I do say about the mustache, what I meant is that unconsciously, I honestly, until the moment when I sat with my friends, it didn't even dawn on me that I had an unconscious bias towards people with a mustache. I really didn't, until I said I wouldn't date someone with facial hair. And then I had to think. I really had to sit down and consciously think about it for I had to process it in my mind for 5 minutes and think, why was I thinking that? And then I thought, I had to, exactly what you're saying, I had to go back and trace it in my brain, take those steps and say, wait a minute, don't do that because that's way back when I first started losing my hearing, which has been back in childhood. I stayed away from people that had facial hair because I can't read their lips. It's just a unconscious thing that I do. I've always done it. And all I'm saying is, for me, I really understand what that word means now, because it's not something I was thinking about. And I'm just saying I can see how easy it is to have our bias. And I'm saying I know everyone has them. We may not want to admit it, me like I am right now, sitting up here and saying it, but we all have them. And unfortunately, and I know, because I go in companies and I talk about this, most people don't want to say, look, I have a bias towards this, or this person, or whatever. No, it's very embarrassing, okay? I understand that, and people don't want to say that. So I always say, let's try to break into very small groups so people can own up and talk about it and be comfortable, because it is very embarrassing. And people think, okay, I'm going to say this, and then everyone's going to hate me, okay? That's all I'm saying. So no, honestly, I would never use Trump over it. And I know a lot of people are worried. I have heard that before, because people are really scared that, I'm not saying you're saying this, but I have heard this, that if one person with disability gets in, oh no, they're going to bring everybody in. And then what are we going to do? Okay? I've heard that a lot. Like, they're kind of scared everyone's going to get in, and then we'll lose our jobs because there'll be all these people with disabilities. Almost like we're a foreign animal or something, like we're a creature. We're just like everybody else. So, you know.
Okay. Thanks, folks. I'm just going to let Steve kind of close out, and then I'm going to ask you, like Marcy was just mentioning, to get into your little groups and have a conversation, all right? Oh, there's another comment back there.
Sorry, I was just talking with Pam here, and so we just wanted to reframe the question because I think it was, we think it was somewhat misunderstood. The question wasn't so much about unconscious bias. It was more about under the conditions that, let's say, two people's accommodations, they could have a disability or not, under the conditions that those accommodations might be at odds. So let's say hiring someone or accommodating, what happens then?
If I could, I think what we're experiencing is that one of the first steps is recognizing you've got the unconscious bias. That's just the first step. So then we have to continue that path to kind of go, is stigma there? Is it become something that really affects our practice and our organization? You know, and if the answer to that is yes, then the next step is, what do we do about it? And you know, the question really pointed to where there may be kind of conflicting needs. How do we overcome that? And it's not a simple process, and it's not a simple answer. It's one that takes concerted effort. You know, our partnership with the WSIB to come up with the plan of how to identify and address and eliminate stigma, it took us like 2 years. And part of that time is allowing the new realizations that are coming into our minds to take root and then to help us find a path through it. It's, you know, our experience was it takes a lot of work, it takes time, and it takes the partnerships to be able to answer the questions, because none of us have that answer. The answer comes from the dialogue among us to find an acceptable solution.
Thanks very much, Steve. And thank you all for your questions and your thoughts. It's been a rich conversation that I hope has set a little bit of the foundation for the conversation that I am going to invite you to now have at your small tables. It's going to be a little bit shorter than we hoped, which is all Tammy's fault, I'm sure. But you will find a large piece of paper as well as a sheet of questions on your table. What I would like you to do is consider those questions and answer them. However, the first question is about personal experiences, so we just want to center the experiences of people who are living with disabilities. So if you are at a table and you are willing to speak about your personal experiences, we do invite you to be the first one to start that conversation. So the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to try and have these conversations, address some of these questions, as many as you can get to in the small amount of time that we have, and then I'll bring you back and we'll do a very, very short little report back. We're calling them gems. That's what we're looking for, the gem of your conversation, okay? And I'm gonna ask you to do that in about 10 minutes. So, from all of this very engaged conversation, which I am so happy is happening through all of these tables, I'm sorry to have to break it up and to make it stop. And I also want to be respectful of your time and try and get everybody out of here today. So, what was the thing that came out of your conversation that was the most exciting for you? Who's feeling like they want to stand up and make sure the rest of the room hears that? I've got one over here.
Heidi.
I see another one over there. Okay, so we've got 2 already. Okay, and another one over here. Great. So introduce yourself when you get the mic, and we will carry on.
Hi. Oh, it is working. Hi, Melissa. I'm Heidi Penning.
Hi, Heidi.
We addressed the last question first, and the one gem from our table comes from Chloe, who's a student at Queen's doing her master's, cultural studies. And she would like to think about a reverse mentorship program where she and other people like her with lived experience can tell their stories to the higher ups, to senior administrators. So kind of a day in the life of. So we thought that was a brilliant idea.
That's great. Thanks so much. We'll head over to this table. Yep, and then we'll come back to you folks. And anyone else who's got something exciting, let us know.
Hi, our table actually identified quite a few things about unconscious bias, but I think what I'm going to do is that we often think language is really important. So what you said, whoever wants to speak, please stand up. I don't stand up. I think that's funny. Sometimes I have to clarify, but we do say that. Do you hear what I say?
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily. Do you see that? No. So
Yeah.
when we look at our language and we're talking about people with disabilities, let's look at our language and make sure that our language does not insult people. Do you want us to identify what we came up with as in the group?
Just the one that was the most exciting for you. And thank you very much for the feedback. I will carry on. Do better.
We talked about assumptions and assumptions about the capabilities of somebody. For example, if you're blind, then you can't travel at work, and that's not the question. The question is how will you travel? Do you have access to transportation?
Mm-hmm.
Always look at the question, not that what you cannot do, but how is it that this task is going to get done? And also the assumptions based on limited knowledge of what somebody can do. That's good enough.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Is there someone on this side of the room? I see you over there and over here. And we'll come back over here after that. And then here. Okay. Gotcha.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ted Bobrowski. I'm from Thunder Bay. I'm Vice President of the Injured Workers in Thunder Bay. Steve invited me and Janet invited me to come out to this, and it was a paid vacation, so I came. I wanted to discuss the bias that I suffered on the job because I think it's a special, unique situation that a lot of people in here never even thought of. When I got hurt on the job, I was working a construction site at a mill in Thunder Bay, and when I hurt myself, there was 10 witnesses. And I guarantee you, if you asked any one of those people what happened? They would say, I threw myself in the ditch. Not one of those people knew what happened to him. Not one of them asked. Everybody just assumed he threw himself in the ditch. Why? Because I had an argument with the foreman that day, before the job started, about not coming in on time, okay? Where the punch clock was a 15-minute walk from where our lunch shack was, where everybody met up to get their jobs for the day. He asked me to come in 15 minutes early every day, no overtime. He asked. I refused. I said, I'm not coming in early if you ain't gonna pay me. This is a union job, okay? Some guys may have a lot of extra time on their hands, and they show up 15 minutes early. I'm not that guy. But that day, I got in an argument with the foreman about that. Now we're doing our job, and I got everybody out of the way. There's a problem on the job. We've got an impaired operator, and I should have reported the guy. And that would have been the end of that. He would have lost his job, and I probably wouldn't have got hurt that day. But just like everybody else there that knew the operator was impaired, we just stayed out of his way. Let him do his job. He was doing his job. Nobody was getting hurt. Foreman that I had the argument with comes over. Everything's fine. But behind him, as he turns, there's 4 white hats coming through the mill. Well, now, he's like, oh my God, I got to do something. All these guys are standing around. They're not working. So he's going to make us work. He's going to create a job. The operator's going in. He's doing his job. But there's all this material that if we clear out of the way, the operator could go in this way, a whole different way to get to where he's going. It's just a make-work project. So I get into an argument with him again. There's no reason for us to be doing this job. He loses it on me. He loses it on me because he's got 4 guys to back him up. Now, all these guys I'm working with are just standing around listening to the argument. I decide, okay, I'll appease this guy. I'm going to go over and lift one end of the steel girder to see the weight, to feel the weight of it. It's not our material. It's iron workers' material. We're not supposed to touch it. But I don't want to get into a big pissing match with this foreman, so I'm going to do what he asked. But in my mind, I'm going to lift this end, go, oh, it's heavy. We're going to have to get an operator in here, we'll get a sling and sling this material out, right? We're not going to move it. But when I went and lifted one end of a steel girder, I was standing on dirt. And behind me was an open ditch. And behind that was a solid concrete base, 3 feet thick, that was there for heavy machinery. And the operator was backfilling all around this cement base. When I lifted that end, another guy that I was working with thought I was going to move the material. He went and lifted the other end. When he lifted the other end of that steel girder, the ground under my feet broke. Now I had a choice to make. Do I fall backwards? That concrete base had rebar sticking up out of it. And I'm probably going to get impaled. This was a split-second decision. I decided to throw the steel girder out of so it didn't land on top of me, do a full twist, and land in the ditch. And when I did that, my back snapped. And nobody knew. Nobody knew. To everybody standing there, I did that on purpose. The bias was there. With my workers, with the bosses, everybody said, he threw himself in the ditch just because he didn't want to do the work because he was pissed off at the foreman. That's the kind of invisible bias that you suffer on a job when you get hurt. This is probably a special circumstance because nobody could see the dirt breaking under my feet. It's not like there was a big landslide. It just threw my balance. The weight of that steel girder was carrying me backwards. I was gonna fall across the ditch and be impaled by those steel rebars. I made a split-second decision to not do that and land in the ditch. I still hurt myself. I'm off work today because of that accident. Everybody stood there and laughed at me. This is what happens when you get hurt on a union job, on a big construction site, because of bias. This is right at the beginning of the injury. This is not, I suffered bias 10 years down the road from WSIB, or this was my fellow workers, you know? And what I'm trying to say is, don't judge. Open your eyes, not just your eyes, your mind. Talk to the person. Don't just assume, make an assumption that, oh, he just did it to himself. You know, he's just looking for a free ride. He's just looking to get out of work.
Right.
It changed my life that day. And I only wish that I had not gone to work that day.
Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we do have to close. The break only goes until 3. It is now 2:52, so your break is going to be a little bit shorter. But I am really, really grateful for all of the thoughts and contributions you've given us today. The pieces of paper where you've captured your thoughts, please leave them on the table. We will collect them. And I would like to thank all of our panelists very much for all of their contributions, and Marie-Ève for her intrepid timekeeping, because that was not easy. And to our mic runner as well, thank you very much for being here. And Kathy for making it happen, because it wouldn't have happened without Kathy.